Tonight, they laughed. They mocked him. They even poured wine on him, thinking he was just an assistant. But in less than 15 seconds, their entire $800 million future would collapse, because the man they humiliated was the one person they should have never touched. What moments earlier had been a buzzing, glamorous banquet filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and polished smiles suddenly became silent enough to hear the wine dripping onto the marble floor. A stream of deep red splashed across the shoulders of a quiet, well-dressed man standing near the corner, someone most guests hadn't paid attention to all night. The executives who caused the scene erupted into laughter, completely unaware of the gravity of what they had just done. Leading the cruel display was a woman in a shimmering emerald dress, her smile sharp and self-satisfied. Beside her, a man in a perfectly tailored suit leaned back, laughing as though humiliating someone was the night's entertainment. They had no idea. Absolutely none had. They had just done that quiet man because was the one person in the building they should never have touched. His name was Evan Cole, though almost no one in the room recognized him. He preferred it that way. Evan was the true majority owner of Raxon Tech, the massive tech corporation the executives were desperately trying to secure an $800 million partnership with. This deal would define their careers, their company's future, maybe even the rest of their lives. But Evan didn't walk into the evening as a billionaire owner with power and authority. He chose to enter as something deceptively simple, a soft-spoken assistant, someone they assumed had no status, no money, no importance. Someone they believed they could push aside without consequence hadn't come to be celebrated. He'd come to obis Evan Irv. He wanted to see their character, the kind that isn't shown in boardrooms or on official documents. But in moments like this, when no one believes there is anything to gain from treating someone with kindness, and they failed spectacularly, the wine traced down his suit and onto the floor. Evan didn't shout. He didn't defend himself. He didn't react at all. Instead, he stood with a calmness that unsettled a few people watching closely. It was the type of calm that hinted at power, the kind that suggested he wasn't embarrassed, but evaluating. They didn't know it yet, but the people laughing were seconds away from destroying the biggest deal of their careers. Because Evan wasn't just observing their behavior, he was deciding their fate. That it was supposed to be a celebration. A warm, relaxed evening before the massive deal signing scheduled for the next morning. After months of negotiation and dozens of meetings, both companies were finally on the brink of sealing an $800 million partnership. To test the true character of their future collaborators, Raxon Tech's board suggested one last informal dinner. No suits, no pressure, just people being themselves. Evan agreed immediately. Not because he needed the dinner, but because he wanted to see who these people really were when the masks of professionalism slipped off. The banquet hall was breathtaking. Golden lights washed over the room like sunlight caught inside crystal. Laughter filled the air. Business leaders clinked glasses, congratulating one another as if the deal were already sealed. Waiters flowed between tables carrying trays of sparkling drinks, and the mood buzzed with celebration. But even from a distance, Evan noticed something off. Crystal, the woman in the shimmering green dress, carried an air of superiority that demanded attention. Derek, her partner in arrogance, shadowed her like a proud echo. Their voices were the loudest in the hall, their confidence bordering on cruelty. From the moment Evan entered the room, they treated him as if he were invisible. They didn't even pretend to be polite. Crystal rolled her eyes when he walked too close. Derek nudged him aside with a dismissive smirk. "Move aside." Crystal snapped, physically brushing past him on the terrace. "This event is for important people," Derek added loudly, earning laughter from the group around him. Evan simply smiled. He didn't argue. He didn't correct them. He didn't announce that he could end their careers with one decision. He just observed, and what he saw was enough to reveal everything he needed to know. The turning point came when Crystal reached for a glass of red wine. Her lips curled into a wicked grin as she whispered to her circle of friends, "Watch this." Before anyone could react, before anyone could stop her, she walked straight toward Evan with deliberate, cruel confidence, and then she tilted the glass. Red wine cascaded down his hair, across his suit, dripping onto the polished marble floor in slow, crimson streams. The sound of laughter echoed through the hall. Crystal's sharp and triumphant, Derek's loud and mocking, but the room around them fell silent. Evan didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He stood calm, unnervingly calm, and that silence spread like wildfire, because the board members watching had just realized what Crystal had done. She hadn't humiliated a random guest. She had humiliated Evan Cole, the man whose signature tomorrow would decide the fate of their $800 million future. That a voice sliced through the silence. Sharp, horrified, and trembling with disbelief. Crystal. Derek. What have you done? Every head turned as Marissa Hale, the respected and formidable chairwoman of Raxenteca's board, pushed through the stunned crowd. Her heels echoed against the marble floor, but nothing was louder than the panic rising in her voice. She rushed straight to Evan, her face draining of color as she took in the sight of him. His suit drenched in red wine, his expression calm but distant, the room around him frozen like a still photograph. I am so sorry. Evan, please let me get someone to help. But Evan gently lifted a hand, stopping her in her tracks. It's okay, he said softly. His voice wasn't shaky or angry, just tired, almost resigned. The wine continued dripping from his hair and shoulders, staining the collar of his expensive suit. I'm used to people underestimating me. The simplicity of the statement made Marissa's heart twist. Crystal, however, scoffed loudly, folding her arms with exaggerated confidence. Underestimating you? Please, she sneered. You're literally just the assistant. The arrogance in her tone snapped the remaining tension like thin glass. Marissa turned toward her sharply, her eyes blazing with a fury that shut up half the room on sight. He's not the assistant. Crystal burst into laughter, waving a dismissive hand. Oh, right. Then what is he? The janitor. Derek joined in mockingly. Maybe he parked the cars outside? Their laughter lasted only a second. Then Marissa spoke the sentence that turned their smug faces pale as snow. He is the majority owner of Raxentech and the final decision-maker for tomorrow's $800 million deal. Silence struck the room like lightning. Crystal's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering into pieces that scattered across the marble. Color drained from her face so fast, she looked like a ghost. Derek stumbled backward, his mouth opening, but no words escaping. His confidence evaporated instantly, replaced with a choking panic. Executives began whispering in frantic, horrified voices. Guests stared with wide eyes. Some even stepped away from Crystal and Derek as if their careers were contagious. The world seemed to tilt, the elegant room suddenly too bright, too quiet, too unforgiving. And Evan? He didn't look furious. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't demand anything, he simply looked disappointed. And somehow, that made everything 10 times worse, because anger could be negotiated with, but disappointment from the man holding the fate of an $800 million deal, that was a disaster they would never escape. After a long, heavy pause, Evan finally exhaled and looked directly at the two executives who had mocked and humiliated him. You judged me based on your assumptions, he said quietly, but his voice carried through the room with startling clarity. Not my actions, not my character, just your own arrogance. Crystal's lips trembled, her earlier confidence shattered like the wine glass at her feet. She took a shaky step toward him. I am so sorry. I didn't know. That's the point, Crystal. Evan's eyes softened, but his tone stayed firm. Respect shouldn't depend on what you know about someone. It shouldn't be conditional. You don't treat people kindly because you think they're important. You treat them kindly because you are. The room went silent. Even the soft music had faded into the background as if the speakers themselves were listening. Derek, pale and sweating, tried to salvage whatever dignity he had left. This was a misunderstanding, he stammered. A joke. We didn't mean anything by it. We can fix this. Evan shook his head slowly, decisively. No, you can't. Those 3 words fell like an executioner's axe. Marissa Hale stood behind Evan, arms crossed, watching the two executives crumble under the weight of their own behavior. The room of guests, investors, CEOs, partners, shifted uneasily, whispering behind their hands but never daring to speak aloud. Evan turned slightly to Marissa. I won't sign the deal with their company. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. That it was simply final. Crystal's knees buckled, and she dropped into a chair as though her body could no longer support the magnitude of what she'd done. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears flooding her eyes. Her entire future, her position, her income, her prestige had evaporated in seconds. Derek staggered backward, hitting the edge of a table before catching himself. He raked his fingers through his hair, chest heaving in panic. Please, Evan, think about this. Our firm will collapse, years of work gone. Evan didn't flinch. You poured wine on a man you thought was beneath you, he said. Now you're learning how expensive arrogance can be. Those words echoed through the hall like thunder. Millions gone. Years of negotiations gone. Their professional reputation obliterated in one reckless moment because they poured wine on the wrong man. Evan walked toward the exit, wine still dripping from his ruined suit, but every step he took radiated a quiet power the room had completely missed earlier. Guests parted instinctively, making a path for him as though a king were passing through. Some stared in guilt, others in awe, but no one dared to breathe too loudly. At the doorway, Evan stopped. He didn't turn dramatically, just a calm, simple glance over his shoulder. But that small movement silenced the entire hall. I hope this teaches you something, he said, his voice steady and impossibly controlled. Treat everyone with respect, not because of what they can give you, but because of who you choose to be. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth in his words hit harder than any threat ever could. Then he walked out, quietly, gracefully, with the dignity the others had thrown away. The moment the doors closed behind him, the chaos erupted. Crystal collapsed into full sobs, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her shaking hands clutching her temples. She had climbed her way up the corporate ladder for 10 years, only to lose everything in 10 seconds of cruelty. Derek slammed his fist onto the table, sending silverware clattering. This can't be happening, he shouted, but the desperation in his voice made it clear he already knew it was. Their executives argued among themselves. Voices raised, accusations flying, panic spreading like wildfire. They weren't just dealing with embarrassment. They were staring at the total collapse of their company's future. Their investors, their board, their partners, none of them would survive this fallout untouched. Meanwhile, Evan moved through the cool night air outside, taking a slow breath. The city lights reflected off the dark stain on his suit, but he didn't seem bothered. In fact, he smiled a soft, peaceful smile. Not because he'd gotten revenge, not because he'd embarrassed anyone, but because he had protected his company from people who had no business being part of its future. And that $800 million deal. The very next morning, Tech signed with another firm, one whose executives treated everyone with dignity, from the janitors to the CEO. A company that valued integrity over image. The message echoed far beyond the ballroom walls. You never know who you're talking to. So choose respect, always. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful, emotional, and jaw-dropping stories every week. And make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next twist-filled episode. See you in the next video.